Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful Monday. Today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an update on some of my baby crested geckos from 2021. It's been about 5 months since we've taken a look at some of my baby geckos, so I want to show you how some of them are developing, along with just showing you some of the geckos I will have available this year in spring. I've been getting quite a few DMs lately of people asking me when I'm going to have geckos for sale, and the short answer to that is sometime in April, so expect about 6 to 8 weeks out from now I will have my sale, but I will of course let you know as we get closer to the day. But before we get into this video, I want to share with you something that's pretty important, and that is the America Competes Act. If you've already heard about this, great, I'm happy for you, and I'm glad you're up to date on your current events. Hopefully you've taken some action against this, but if you haven't, I just wanted to briefly share what it is and how it would affect you as a reptile keeper. So the America Competes Act is a very long bill. It's like 3,000 some pages, and USARK found a couple amendments that they're trying to make to the Lacey Act in there. The Lacey Act has to do with reptiles, and the amendments would have to update the Lacey Act. And basically these amendments would pretty much end exotic pet keeping as we know it, or at the very least drastically change it if it were to get passed. One thing I should mention too is this does not only apply to reptiles, it applies to amphibians and invertebrates and birds and mammals and tropical fish. Anything that is not a dog, cat, or domesticated farm animal, this would apply to. And not only would this apply to us, but it would apply to pet stores, zoos, everything across the board. So you can see why this would be very detrimental. I want to talk to you about a few things that would change if this were to get passed. And right now it has already passed in the House of Representatives and is on to the Senate. So it's very important that you take action after this. Hopefully by either donating to USARK or emailing your senators, which is free, or giving them a call. It only takes about 5 minutes to hopefully prevent this from getting passed. And one thing to clarify is I'm not against the whole America Competes Act. It is simply these amendments to the Lacey Act, which happen to be in this very long bill. So some of the things that would change if this act were to get passed is interstate travel. They are trying to create a list. Right now it acts on a blacklist basis, meaning let's say Burmese pythons maybe are on the blacklist. They cannot travel over interstate lines, right? Well, they're trying to change it to a whitelist, meaning all species would need to be on said list for them to be considered okay to travel. And if they were not on the list, then by default, they would be on the, I guess you could say, blacklist, but they would not be allowed to be traveled over interstate lines or taken over interstate lines for any reason. You know, vet care, you're moving, this or that, anything. It would be a felony, punishable by 5 years in prison and or a $20,000 fine. So basically, it would try and list species as injurious, meaning you could not take the pet with you across state lines unless they were on the white list, right? So think about the white list that is very scary. Let's say this law did get passed, crested geckos made it to the white list, which is great because that means they can be transported across state lines. The Fish and Wildlife Service at any time, without any public hearing, any public knowledge, they could say, you know what, crested geckos, they're damaging the environment. We're going to take them off this list. And once it is updated in the federal registry, then crested geckos could no longer be transported across state lines, meaning that one day I could be selling crested geckos. The next day, the Fish and Wildlife Service could say, nope, they're going off the white list. They're taking them off. And without anybody knowing, it could be illegal to sell them across state lines. So that's very scary to me because everything could be good. And then one day it's just, you know, it's a felony. And that's pretty wild, especially considering the consequences too if you were to get caught. So that's just kind of a brief summary of what this is. If you'd like to learn more about it, I recommend going to the USARK website itself. You can read a whole article on it, or you could just search it up on YouTube. There's a ton of other videos on it if you want to learn more about it in depth. But basically, it would pretty much kill the exotic pet keeping industry as we know it, especially if, like, say, crested geckos did not make the whitelist or got taken off for some reason. That would mean I could only sell my geckos in the state of Wisconsin. And as you can imagine, I'm guessing the crested gecko market in Wisconsin is not very big. So, you know, this would put a lot of small businesses, people like myself who just kind of do it as a hobby, in a very tight situation. So if you can, you know, email your senators. USARK has the instructions. They even have the email you can send to them, and all you got to do is sign your name. I did it. It took about 5 minutes. You can donate to USARK too. Anything helps. Anything is better than nothing. So check it out. I'll leave the link down below in the description to the USARK page where you can read about it. But with that being said, let's jump into the video. So now that we got the scary stuff out of the way, let's take a look at some beautiful crested geckos. I want to do this so you can hopefully get an idea of what I'm going to have for sale this year. And I'm thinking that my next video is going to be another video showing off some geckos. Every gecko in this video is a gecko that I've produced this past year, but in that video I want to show you some of the geckos that might be available that either I did not produce or were from previous years. So with that being said though, let's jump into the video. So our first baby here is from Vector and Angelina. You can see this one has a good amount of pattern and a good amount of white. This is a gecko that is very likely to develop more white and more pattern in the future. And one thing to mention is now that these geckos are a little bit bigger, in that 8 to 12 gram range, you can kind of get a better idea of what they're going to look like as adults. So this is one of my favorite ones. This one probably won't be for sale, but I will have siblings for sale from this guy. He's one of my favorite grow outs right now. I love his beautiful pattern. I think he's just awesome. Next up here on our list, we got a gecko out of Diamond and Red Velvet. And I'd like to thank the person who pointed out in my last video that Diamond and Red Velvet both had pinstripe going on. In my maybe it was 2 videos ago where I was talking about why you can't predict baby gecko patterns. I didn't even notice that Diamond and Red Velvet both had pinstriping, even though it wasn't super noticeable. Someone pointed it out in the comments, and I went back and looked, and I was like, hey man, you're right, that makes sense. So, but anyway, you can see here we have a beautiful red pinstripe. I have a lot of these kind of geckos growing up, a lot of red pinstripes this year. This one happens to have a little bit less pattern on the sides, but you can see a beautiful perfect pin. I love these reds. I love reds in general, and it's nice to finally get some good red pinstripes. Kind of sliding to the opposite end of the spectrum here, we have a gecko from Hellboy and Autumn. Hellboy being the kind of interesting one with 2 base colors. I was hoping to get some super radical 2 base color animals, but obviously I didn't. But I did get some pretty neat dark pinstripe animals. This one doesn't have a full pin, and I don't believe any of them have a perfect full pin. I could be wrong on that, but I do like that this one has an interesting face and an interesting tail. This one's got kind of like dark splotches all over the face and kind of like dark splotches on the tail. Not Dalmatian spots, just like darker spots of pattern, which I think is pretty cool. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of pinstripes in general, but I think that the dark ones and the red ones are pretty cool, and I'm interested to see how much darker these guys get as they get bigger. Swooping back around to Vector and Angelina, here's kind of a different looking baby. You can see this one still has that white like from Vector, but this one has a little bit more of the tricolor kind of look. He probably got that from his mom. But a lot of these geckos I'm expecting to have more white and more pattern as they get older. But this is another one that I really, really like. I think a lot of these babies are going to look fantastic as adults, and I just can't get enough of them. I love looking at them when I'm feeding them, and I just love the kind of tricolory little orange look that they got going on. Next up, we have another baby from Vector and Angelina. I just wanted to throw this one in here because I thought it was kind of interesting. You can see this one doesn't have really any white on it like the last 2 did. It has a little bit of cream, but it's got kind of more of a lavendery color. And I think it's pretty interesting because if you looked at the parent pictures of Vector and Angelina, Vector is very dark, Angelina is very light. From my knowledge of all the babies that hatched out of this pair, I don't think a single one has a dark base color. They're all kind of either light brown or maybe a medium brownish tone, but none of them are dark black like Vector is, which I think is very interesting. Just because in the past, Angelina has also had her mom was a very lavender color, and the mom produced the majority of lavender babies also. So that must be pretty deep in her genes, where she's always producing all these lavender babies, which I just think is kind of interesting, or those more lighter geckos. So next up we have a baby here from Enzo and Moon. You can see this one's got some cute little white spots on the side. It's not very red. I have a couple babies like this. They're kind of just more of a slightly red brownish color, but this is kind of a last minute pair just to test some things out. But he's got a nice head structure on him. He's a little bit more muted than some of the other geckos, but I do have a couple like this that will be for sale come springtime. I didn't produce a whole lot of patternless reds this year. In fact, I didn't produce any. I specifically did that though, just because I had so many from the previous year, if that makes sense. So in 2020 I produced a lot, 2021 I didn't do any, and now in 2022 I'm repeating some of those red pairs to get some more patternless red animals, just because I really like them. I honestly like anything red, but definitely patternless reds are my favorite. Switching gears a little bit and heading back to Hellboy and Autumn, this one's pretty interesting just because it's got a little bit more orange to it, but this one is also closer to a perfect pinstripe. Not quite, but a little bit closer. But a lot of these babies, as you can see, turned out pretty dark, and this one actually I caught looks like it's going to be shedding soon. So in theory it could get even a little bit darker, but I'm going to have a good variety of geckos available this year, just from the ones that I produced along with some of the ones from last year, and other ones that are going to be up for sale, of course. And I also have some lily whites available come probably fall for the majority of them, just because they're very small yet. A lot of them are only 2 or 3 grams. So I'm going to give them some time to grow up, but I might have 1 or 2 available in this spring sale. We'll just have to wait and see on how they develop in the future, because I also want to keep some of them for myself. But yeah, it's just pretty interesting on the variety of geckos that I had this year. Everyone was pretty consistent across the board as far as producers went. Nobody produced anything real crazy or out of the ordinary than what I was expecting. But let's end this video off on a good red note. And here's kind of a younger red from Diamond and Red Velvet. You can see this one has more pattern than the one I showed you at the beginning of the video, but it's not quite as red yet, but I think it'll start to catch up to its sibling later on. But I just love these red geckos. I love the patternless reds. I love the patterned reds. It doesn't really matter. I just think a nice red gecko, there's something to be said for it. But with all that being said, hopefully you saw some pretty geckos in this video that you might be interested in come springtime. Otherwise, I hope you to take action against the amendments to the Lacey Act. Like I said, link to USARK is down below in the description. And with that, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in my next one.